Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I'm honored to have Jimmy Dore back on today to discuss a lot of the chaos in the world, plenty of the things he's been covering on his show. And hopefully we have a non-manipulated interview this time, as last time I've mentioned on my show, it was constantly manipulated every 20 seconds. Jimmy was being booted out. We'll see if that happens today. It's good to have you back on, Jimmy. How are you?
Good. Great to see you.
Yeah. Before we get into anything else, I mean, that just any thoughts on that and how weird that way, did you ever find anything else out about that? Did that ever happen in any other interviews? You got
no, that the only time it's ever happened was the last time with you.
God, it's just so weird. Just so many things like that today, but I'm sure we can overlap with some of those points in the conversation today. I'd like to start with you. I have a few different things I'd like to get into. I think that some of this stuff you've been covering on your show, and I think it's always important to kind of overlap these thoughts and see how other people see them. And the one thing I thought to start with is a positive note, but at the same time, like, get your thoughts on where this is going and where the administration is. But you might have seen this in the news going around in regard to Kennedy canceling, or at least staying and getting, preparing to cancel nearly $500 million in mRNA contracts. Before we go into that, though, at the same time, in an interesting overlap, this is what Trump was asked just at the same time this came out in regard to the contradiction between his stance and where this has always been going. And so I found this interesting.
The driving force behind Operation Warp Speed, these mRNA vaccines that are the gold standard.
Right.
Now your health secretary is pulling back all the funding for research. He's saying that the risks outweigh the benefits, which puts him at odds with
Research
the entire
on what?
medical community and with you. What is going on?
Research on what?
Into mRNA vaccines.
Well, we're going to look at that. We're talking about it, and they're doing a very good job. And, that is a pass. Operation Warp Speed was, whether you're Republican or Democrat, considered one of the most incredible things ever done in this country. The efficiency, the way it was done, the distribution, everything about it has been amazing. But, that was now a long time ago. And we're on to other things, but we are speaking about it. We have meetings about it tomorrow at 12 o'clock, and we'll determine. We're looking for other answers to other problems, to other sicknesses and diseases, and I think we're doing really well. Yes, ma'am, please.
So his typical meandering non-answer aside, what do you take from that? And the conversation in general, like positive note, but at the same time, Stargate, everything else. How do you read all that? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think with Trump, he should have been more prepared for that question, because I think a better answer to that question from Trump's perspective would have been, we were in what we were being told by all the experts was a deadly pandemic that was going to wipe out the Western civilization. So we had to get on it and take emergency use authorization that we normally don't. So this is emergent. We're not in an emergency anymore. And we're going to study this even closer. And the mRNA platform seems to have more problems than we thought it did. And that doesn't take away from the, amazing job we did on Warp Speed. But, that I wouldn't handle it like that. Like, hey, we were in a tough spot when we went with the COVID-19 vax, and we're not in that spot anymore. And so it's time to really take a good look at the cost benefit analysis. Make sure that's the way he should have handled it. And I think it's great that RFK is the mRNA vaccine platform has never worked. And it didn't work this last time. So they had to change the definition of what a vaccine was, literally in the dictionary, change the definition of what a vaccine is, so the COVID-19 vaccine could be considered a vaccine. Before, it used to be a vaccine gave you immunity from a virus. Now that they changed that, and then it creates an immune response to a virus, which makes it a therapeutic at best. And with all the adverse events, the cost benefit analysis is in the negative. So
right.
It seems from all the analysis I've seen, from people pushing back on the establishment narrative around the COVID vaccine, it seems that it causes the cost benefit analysis isn't there. It's too high of a cost for the benefit you get from it. And
if any,
and in fact, the more of those the Cleveland Clinic study showed that the more vaccines you got, the more likely you were to become infected with COVID, just like last year's flu vaccine, by the way. If you took the flu vaccine last year, you were 27% more likely to get sick from the flu. So that's called negative efficacy, meaning you would have been healthier and better off not taking the vaccine. If you did take the flu, that's also not a vaccine. That's why they often refer to it as a flu shot, because it's not a vaccine, and the flu vaccine doesn't work.
It's interesting.
It certainly doesn't work the way they make you want to think it works.
Yeah.
So it might work in some kind of narrow definition that they give, but it certainly doesn't work the way people think it works. Like, I'm going to get the flu shot, and then I will have immunity from this year's flu, but that's not what it does.
Yeah, it works at not at giving you the flu. It works at maybe giving you myocarditis, right? Guillain-Barré syndrome. But the thing is, you bring up the 27%. I hadn't seen that. That's interesting. So I think you've also covered the study that came out right before the COVID-19 illusion dynamic, and it was one that the Pentagon put forward. Remember this? And it was what? It was it 30-something% more likely to get the flu, but it was also included in coronaviruses. So I have to check out that study, because it's, how often is it, like, is it ever a point in which the study shows that they actually did what they claim? It's like, so I agree with your point. It's like the verbiage, is it work in the way that they want it to work, or is it actually even effective in any way? But going back to the mRNA thing, it's interesting though. I agree with this first simplest point. Like, obviously I don't think he did that on accident. I think Trump has a way where he tries to keep himself distanced from certain things that are uncomfortable by doing that exactly. But I agree, he should have had a better answer about entirely. But what do you sense from that, though? Do you think, one, is RFK Jr. going to actually go through with that? And how does that make sense with the Stargate platform and all the other things they're doing? And with Trump's response, it seems to suggest like he's already kind of he said, well, we'll talk about that. He also praised warp speed, by the way, again, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, he's put himself in a real pickle, because his base is definitely against the mRNA platform and vaccine, because they've done their research and they've looked into it, and they know that it's never been used successfully. And so, and here he doesn't want to give up his big achievement, which was Operation Warp Speed. So he's been saying when he says that it's an achievement in Operation Warp Speed on a campaign, when he was campaigning, his crowd would boo him.
I know.
So this is just another, this is just Trump being caught between a rock and a hard place. He knows, I think the other weird thing is that Larry Ellison, who's a big donor, I think he's the second richest guy in the world now, maybe. Anyway, he gave a speech at the White House talking about how mRNA is the future, and that we can give your own individualized cancer vaccine for you personally. And, it's just all wishful thinking. It's all pie in the sky. This is not happening. That, again, they haven't figured out how to safely administer an mRNA vaccine. And so is that it? Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
So, believe me, his base doesn't want anything to do with transhumanism or mRNA vaccines or the warp speed or the COVID vac. They don't want anything to do with it, and they're correct. So yeah, again, that's just Trump not being ready for that question. I think RFK has to do everything methodically, because he has powerful enemies, and not only does he have Big Pharma as his enemy, but he has the media that's bought by Big Pharma. He has the medical journals that are bought by Big Pharma. He has the medical boards and associations like the American Pediatrics Association, places like that. They're all bought and paid for by Big Pharma. So they come at him. They're launching lawsuits. So RFK has to make sure he has all his T's crossed and all his I's dotted when he decides to do something, like when he decides to stop recommending the COVID-19 vaccine for pregnant women or for children or for boys under 30, stuff like that. He has to make sure he has the data already, and there's not the data there. So he has to go out and do these tests. And, they've never done, just for instance, they've never done a placebo-controlled test for modern day vaccines. So he has to now somehow figure out how to go do those tests, get that data, so he can have the science backing him up. And he knows that he has to have a watertight, as far as the science goes, it has to be watertight. He has the data, because he's a lawyer and he knows how they can pick you apart when it comes to a lawsuit over these things.
But what's
so a
interesting,
lot of people in the Maha movement are upset that he's not moving fast enough, that things aren't moving fast enough at HHS. And of course, no, we all want them to move faster. I wanted him, but it's all going in the right direction. It's just not going fast enough for people.
yeah, okay, but I don't agree with that.
In my life, it's going in the right direction.
But I don't agree with that though, and I think a lot of people in the Maha movement don't. But I think that, like I said, I am last night too. I'm very, very hopeful that this is the indication that you're right. You know what I mean? Like that this is the first step of that. I really hope that's the case, as anybody should, because this is, it's not about politics. This is what the right direction. But, how do you fold in like the support of the MMR shot or the many different moves that have been taken that don't align with this, or like the FDA coming out and making it clear that the safe and effective information around these shots were showing it was safe and effective. There's a lot of different points there, but I agree with you. The logic shows that, his past work speaks for itself, and the direction, even this last point included, seems to show that there are places where he is definitely trying. But like with fluoride or different places, like they're now appealing the fluoride ruling, right? Like, so these things, maybe you're right. Maybe all of this is indication that somebody else is working around him. And to your point, like that maybe it wouldn't be in his best interest to come up and wave out and say this is happening, because then something, but there are moves that just don't align with that idea. What do you think? Like just taking MMR, for example, something he built a huge momentum on previously and very clearly did take a different stance on it later. How do you read that? Is that just trying to get, kind of like a head fake to get these things done? How would you read that?
Again, I don't know what the inner workings of what's happening, but I think that he has to, that maybe the data is not there. He has to go out and create that data. He has to go out and create those tests and do double-blind studies and placebo tests on those vaccines. So then he could go, here's the data. Right now, I'm sure that they've buried that data that would show his point of view. And so he has to go out and create it. That's my guess. That's what I'm guessing. And yeah, I mean, I saw Vinny Prasad before he got forced out. No, that's another thing. That's like,
interesting.
Vinny Prasad got forced out, and he did a press conference where he, ripped the COVID-19 vaccine, and he told you the truth about it, about how much myocarditis and how many adverse events and all the horrible side effects, and how they also manipulated the data around it. He did a 15-minute press conference, and he really laid it out. I covered that on my show. And I was like, wow,
he also said it was safe and effective in that press conference, though, right? So do you think he was, go ahead.
I mean, to say that that's what he said in that, I think is a misframing of that press conference. He came out with both barrels against the COVID-19.
No. I'm sorry, Jamie. Just to be clear, not that press conference. When the FDA came out with him and McCary, right? They made it very clear that they went through the evidence around the COVID-19 injections and said that the evidence said it was safe and effective, and then was reiterated in front of Congress. Now, my point is, we all agree, and you would well know that's not true. And then when he comes out and says it elsewhere, my point is, what do you think that is? Do you think he was being held back from saying that when he was in the administration? I mean, I think that's quite obvious, but I'm just trying to get how you read that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I covered Dr. McCurry saying that on CBS Morning News, and he was acting like he didn't know yet whether a healthy 11-year-old girl should get her, 10th booster or something. And he said the data's not there. And I'm like, well, we all know. So I don't know why he said that. I don't know why they're saying that stuff, but I do know that they've stopped recommending. So they're basically doing the Barrington Declaration right now. So the Barrington Declaration, if people know, was people like Jay Bhattacharya and lots of other people leading in the field at the beginning of COVID said you shouldn't try to give everybody this COVID vaccine. You should just target the people who are the most vulnerable, the elderly, people with comorbidities. And so that was that part of it. And it seems like that's where they are right now with the COVID-19 vaccine.
Do you agree with that?
they're recommending it to people who are, elderly and people, because as we know now, COVID really only affected the people who are elderly or people with comorbidities. It was only deadly to those people, just like the flu, as Bill Gates said, but a little different.
Do you agree with that though? The Barrington Declaration, like that point specifically, do you agree that it should be like, what's your stance on the injection? Let's just say, to be specific, the ones that we went through during the COVID-19 dynamic, which are pretty much the same thing we're dealing with now. Do you agree that some people could benefit from it, and or do you think it's just a no-go for everybody?
Again, I'm not a doctor,
Sure.
and no matter how old I was, I wouldn't take that vaccine.
Yeah. This is why I get so confused by this, is that, we see this, right? And I think that, we've all had our different journeys through this. And I think, interestingly, how most people, even largely Democrats at this point, are coming to a point that we were misled. And so it's interesting that are now, what's coming around is sort of like it's okay for some people. And I just think that's one of the issues with, like, specifically the MAHA movement. Dr. Bowden was just on Joe Rogan, just kind of laying out all this stuff, which I'm really glad to see, by the way. And she's very, very critical of the movement in general, because it's hard to take at face value these steps as positive when, we all seem to acknowledge that they know it's bad for everybody, and that RFK was literally saying that before. And then it's like, well, for some, and it's like, I get the point though. Like, if you're forced to play through politics, that maybe that's the best you can do. I just have a hard time accepting
that's
that.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
I think that, so for RFK to get his nomination confirmed, he had to make a lot of concessions to the Senate. He had to make a concession to, and now I'm blanking on the senator's name, but to get his vote for confirmation, he had to promise that he would run everything past this one senator who's the head of this one committee. And he would have a monthly meeting with him, and that he had to promise that he wouldn't take away people's vaccines. So I think, politics, you don't like to see how politics is made. That's why it's called making the sausage. Mm-hmm. So I think he's going as far as he can go, as fast as he can go. And it's certainly, it's certainly 1,000 times better than it was under the previous FDA, or the previous HHS, or Joe Biden's. Before they were telling everybody, that you got to get it, and then now we're back to nobody needs to get it, except for people who are just like the flu shot, except people are really old.
That's fair.
So that is, it's a 95% sea change, and
in regard to that one
it's
thing,
disappointing it's not 100, but that's how politics works.
Yeah, so in regard to that one thing, you could argue that it's like, clearly very different than saying everyone has to take it or you're going to be put in jail or whatever else. But there's a lot more going on. I think that today, like, I've been wondering more and more about whether it was the agenda, whatever we think that is, was even really about the injection, but more so about the technology and where it's going. And I think we've moved beyond that. Not necessarily in the sense that people will still work at making these things and governments and people will be involved, but that the agenda itself is not necessarily focused on forcing everybody to get a shot or whatever they were doing through that. And so my point is that where the administration as a whole still continues to go, whether RFK is being forced to do things he doesn't like or not, I just don't agree with the thing that I feel like things are getting, in some cases, a lot worse. In a lot of, it's not just the medical field either. It's about the way these things fold into, like you've talked about, Palantir surveillance, from a genomic level, like the biodigital convergence, you've talked about all these things. And it's like, that's what I worry about where this is going. And I worry that, if we stay focused on this one discussion and, we miss the forest for the trees, you know what I mean? That kind of a thing. And any thoughts on that? And I wanted to get into some Washington, D.C. stuff too.
Yeah. Again, it's the first time in my life I've had any amount of trust in the FDA and the CDC and HHS. And so, you saw that they're having lawsuits filed against them left and right for doing the right thing, for trying to tell the truth about the mRNA platform, about the COVID vaccine. They're having, incendiary articles written all over the place, from the New York Times to everywhere, saying that they're taking away our vaccines. He said he promised he wouldn't, and now he is. And it's, so they're really, it's when the mainstream news, when the pharma bought news starts complimenting RFK, that's when I'm going to get nervous.
Yeah, I mean, that's always a good point to make, that, we should be questioning their intentions, but I think it's just as logical to say when, it's not like if they don't say it, the opposite is true kind of a thing. Like, it's a good rule of thumb. But I think today more than ever, the power structures are very aware that, we don't trust any of them, and the media in general. And so there's like new elements of how this goes forward. But your points are well taken. And I agree. I think we should consider it. We should consider, like I said from the first point, that I really genuinely hope this is the beginning of that path. I really do. And I think that if it does go that direction, it will eventually challenge a lot of things, like Trump continuing to say that this thing was successful. It's like, that's why I was kind of interesting to see how this is beginning to, like, I'm surprised that journalist, whatever you want to call the person in that room, was asking that question. That's been an obvious question for years, but suddenly it comes out, and kind of to your point, probably because now it's becoming acceptable to go after them from within inside that paradigm. It's just interesting.
Yeah.
Go good.
No, I'm still surprised at how most people that I know, anyway, the people I come in contact with in comedy clubs here in Hollywood, and people I know in Los Angeles, how most people are not interested in COVID, or making people, that the fact that they were lied to on such an unbelievable level,
Right.
the fact that they were used as guinea pigs, the fact that the lack of interest, and I read somebody wrote something on Twitter about why, and it's because if they admit that, then they have to admit that they took part in the most fascistic thing that's ever been perpetrated on the American people, and that they themselves were acted in monstrous ways, because they did. The people who were shaming you for questioning and having healthy skepticism about big pharma and the government, the people who shamed you for that, the people who ostracized and smeared people for that, they were acting in monstrous ways, and they were propping up the biggest act of fascism in my lifetime to be perpetrated on America. I mean, there's nothing more Nazi-like than forcing people to take experimental medical treatments, or you can't go to work to feed your family and pay your mortgage, or you can't go to school, or you can't go to college, or you can't travel, or you can't have lunch. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it, that people, I still can't get over how many people don't have the integrity to stand up and say something. And my favorite comedians, they almost all of them got it wrong, except for Joe Rogan. Almost all of them got it wrong, and not
Dave Chappelle was one, right? Or what was the guy that was on Saturday from Half Baked? I'm forgetting his name. He came out and did that really great skit. That's one I can remember too. I forget his name. I'll look it up. But there was a few of them that did stand out. But you're right. It was very few and far between. Why do you think that is? You think they were just afraid?
I think that
From comedy.
I think that I think they kind of believed what they were saying, but all it took was a little bit of fear. And when you mix it with hating Trump, right? So they were very clever. The establishment was very clever. Even though Trump was rah-rah for the vaccine, they somehow made it that he was anti-vax. If you're a Trumper, you're anti-vax. It was really quite a sleight of hand. So all the people who were opposing Trump indignantly, like as if Trump was the problem instead of the system that made people desperate enough to vote for Trump was the problem. Those same people who failed to see that it was 8 years of Obama's failed policies, 8 years of Obama bailing out the banks while kicking people out of their homes, 8 years of Barack Obama giving you a right-wing healthcare plan that benefited the big pharma and the insurance companies, and him taking bribes from the banks so we don't have a functioning banking system. They failed to realize that that's what gave us Trump. They just focused on Trump, exactly what the establishment and the media wanted them to do. I guess, most of the comedians who I used to look towards, they're not that smart. They're not George Carlin, it turns out, and far from it. Right. And they're just as easily manipulated by propaganda, to the point where if you're a comedian and you're shaming people for questioning the establishment propaganda or the establishment or you're questioning and you're shaming people for doing that, you have lost the plot 100% at what it means to be a comedian. And it just turns out that they're not that great. It just turns out there are people who have the gift of being funny, but they don't have a gift of integrity, or they don't have the gift of I don't know whatever you would say George Carlin and Bill Hicks had. They don't have that. They're very, their brains are very malleable by the establishment, and they can use all their comedy powers to prop up the establishment instead of poke holes in the establishment narrative, which is what they're supposed to do. It was, again, it's a very depressing. I lost a lot of friends now, and I lost a lot of respect for a lot of people during COVID. That's no joke. It's still really hard on me. And, I miss those people because they're fun to hang around with. But I just have lost all respect for them. And that goes for most of the people that I used to hang out with in Hollywood. I just don't, not only did they were one of those people who shamed and slandered people like me for questioning and for correctly questioning and having healthy skepticism. Turns out 100% correct. And so I just, it's just left a bitter taste in my mouth. I try not to be bitter about it, but it's depressing if I think about it too much. And yeah, so I'm still shocked that, people are still angry at Joe Rogan and me for telling them the truth about ivermectin. But they're not angry at Dr. Fauci, who everyone now admits or accepts that he funded the virus that they all freaked out about, and that they hate Joe Rogan over. But they're not angry at the guy who had literally funded to invent that virus and then lied about it. So to me, that just shows cognitive dissonance. And it goes back to the fact that they cannot allow themselves to admit that they were wrong about it, because admitting that they were wrong about it means that they were monsters.
I'm glad you brought that up again. I think a point that I think is important to consider in all that is the family part of it too. Is that you have mothers and fathers and siblings, that near force their children to do these things. And so they'll never want to admit to themselves that they did that. You know what I mean? And that's a really powerful thing to think about. But to the comedy aspect of it, it's clearly, and I think in a lot of other fields too, it's just people they just go along to get along. And that's sad, especially with comedy, as you're pointing out. That's where it, it's a form of pushing back against the authority when you really look at it correctly, And so I think it's interesting that there's so many people just kind of going on. But to your point as well, like you said before, and I've seen others in the comedic field make the point that there was a huge lull during COVID-19. It was just very bad comedy and very, not very critical, very kind of like making fun of people that didn't follow the narrative,
Yes.
Sad stuff.
Comedians going on for 15 minutes, 20 minutes at a clip, going on in their comedy specials, making fun of people who questioned authority. It is the most mind-blowing thing. And, they've had to bend themselves into pretzels so they were making the anti-intellectual argument in their comedy specials, and they had to dress it up as we're the smart people. And no, you're just the propagandized people. You're the people who still believe in the two-party system. You're the perfect dupe of the establishment, and that's the irony.
Yeah, it is. It is. And right now, I think that's what's leading the charge in all of these fields, mainstream alternative media, anything, are people that are like almost not even aware that they're being played and used, like throughout the way all these different mechanisms work. It's a crazy time, man. It definitely is. Limited time in general, I'd like to go into something else that I wanted your thoughts on that I think is really interesting. Have you seen the conversation, both the previous times it's been floated, I think even in the past administration, and then recently about the federalizing DC point? It's been, go ahead.
No, I know they brought it up before. I don't know the ins and outs of that argument. I think it's probably a bad idea.
Well, I was
city. That's my flex, is that it's not a good idea. It's certainly anti-conservative or anti-libertarian. You want to have people's decisions made as close to home as possible. You don't want to give over the federal government to run a city. I think that's I bet they can, as bad as DC is run, I guess, I'm sure they could do a worse job.
Yeah, no, I agree. But what's interesting to me is the whole thing is really interesting in its own right. Like the reality of what DC is, not having statehood and what that means for the people that live there, and the long time argument of wanting statehood. But it's interesting to me, the overlap. And I want to play another clip about this in regard to a rumor that was going around Washington, D.C. that I've heard more than once that I can't necessarily verify, which is why I haven't played it. It's like a few months old, but now coming back around as with the Freedom City overlap, and now the conversation of federalizing DC, whether that's what what they actually think when they're saying that, but controlling it from like the executive branch level. We play this clip, and it'll probably add some thoughts to this and how this overlap can be quite alarming with the technocratic Peter Thiel element.
Politics, and I just got back from a trip in Washington, D.C., and I want to tell you the absolutely unhinged rumor I heard from current and former federal workers and people on Capitol Hill about what Donald Trump is about to do next, because if it's true, it will alter the course of American history forever. I want to preface this by saying I'm not a journalist. What I'm about to share with you is just a rumor, though I did hear it from multiple people who do not know each other from multiple areas of the federal government. So with all those disclaimers, I'm going to share this with you anyway, because I think you deserve to know. Long story short, Donald Trump is trying to give Washington, D.C. to billionaire Peter Thiel. I mean that literally, not figuratively. Like, he's trying to give a billionaire control over the land and the people within Washington, D.C. The specific rumor is that instead of granting Washington, D.C. statehood like its residents have been demanding for years, he wants to actually roll back the little bit of independence that they already have of self-government. Apparently, he's considering turning the district into what some call a freedom city. Proponents of freedom cities advocate for areas and territories that are governed and owned completely by corporations.
Now she goes on, that's the gist of it though, so we have to watch the whole thing. It's just first, what do you think about that overlap and where that goes? Like the Freedom City thing is very interesting, and like Prospera and Peter Thiel funding it with Marc Andreessen, and those two being directly involved with the idea of freedom cities, whole technocratic thing. What comes to your mind?
Doesn't sound good. That's what comes to mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Doesn't sound good. And it seems, again, to be another betrayal of what MAGA stands for. And, I wonder if Trump would get elected if he ran again. I mean, what the Trump and the Republicans have in their favor is the same thing that the Democrats have in their favor, is that their opponents are so repulsive. And because if Trump wasn't running against Kamala Harris and Joe Biden or Tim Wall, he wouldn't know. I mean, any decent candidate, but they weren't. They're running against the worst people in the world.
Do you think that's by design? Like that's made that way? Go ahead.
Yes, well, we know it's by design because of. I'm sure you know the Pied Piper theory. So that was when the Clintons actually called up Donald Trump and convinced him to run for president in 2016 because they thought he would be the easiest to beat. So they thought that they would be able to get negative press on him, and they would be able to make him out to be a buffoon and all that stuff. And so they literally handpicked him. And so, of course, there's a big interest in the establishment in keeping. That's why Bernie Sanders and AOC are so important. And Donald to the Democratic Party, as Donald Trump is to the Republican Party, because people had it with the Republican Party, which is why Donald Trump was able to wipe the floor with them in 2016's primary very easily. People were done with the establishment, just like people were done with the establishment Democratic Party, because and Bernie Sanders revealed that he had at least half the people who are voting in a Democratic primary voting for a guy who wanted to blow up the Democratic Party. And so, but it turns out that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and AOC and people like that are just there to make sure people stay invested in this two-party system. And it's, someone else, I think maybe it was Glenn Ford at the Black Agenda Report, maybe not. Someone else said this, was that, we'd be better off if we didn't have an AOC or a Bernie Sanders, because what they do is they give people the false hope that there's somebody in the Democratic Party fighting for you, and that duopoly politics is viable to help you. And it just keeps getting worse every year. It doesn't get better. It's the ratchet effect, right? And it just keeps getting worse and worse. And so, I think that Donald Trump, he's just almost completely, just when it comes back down. How about when it comes down to protected classes of people, right? Everybody hated that the left protected, everything was racist, everything was homophobic, everything was anti-trans, and you had to have these rules and laws that created protected classes of people. And that was, that was repulsive to most people who consider themselves conservative Americans, and anybody who's a liberal, either a real liberal, which is I am. And then he just replaces it. He just creates a whole new protected class,
Right?
And then he starts to enforce it. And that protected class are Zionists, but he does it under the guise of Jews, right? Even though most Jews I know are not Zionists,
Right.
And so he starts to, how the left created hate speech, and then so now they can control you, which is really a thought crime. And so he's doing the same thing. And then instead of going after drug cartel leaders and gang members who are here illegally, he's going after people who are here legally, who are in college and following the rules. And he's kicking them out of the country for their thought crimes, and not even their bad thoughts about America. It's their bad thoughts about a foreign country.
Accurate thoughts about America at the end of the day. Go ahead, sorry.
So Donald Trump it's just another, it seems to me this is another betrayal of the MAGA movement. If they do this thing, federalizing Washington, D.C., conservatives and Republicans, for as long as I can remember, have eschewed the federal government taking control, and that they always wanted the control of communities to be at the local level. And so this is the exact opposite. This is just like one more step in their 15-minute city of the entire country. That's what they're looking, and it's a globalist agenda. It's not just in America. So I don't know how much longer Donald Trump can keep sheep herding people into the Republican Party. Probably as long as people like Kamala Harris are the face of the Democratic, Chuck Schumer, Kamala Harris, AOC, Bernie Sanders, phonies like that. I think that's really the death of that. That's why the reason why we can't make any progress in America and why we can't have nice things is because of that. They have people like Trump and Bernie that sheep herd people back into the two-party system. And let's remember, the two parties agree on all the worst things. They all agreed on the Ukraine war. They all agreed on the Syrian war, the Afghanistan war, the Libyan war, the Iraq war. They all agreed on giving a right-wing healthcare plan they all agree on the worst things. They all agree on Pentagon funding. They all agree on Israel funding. They all agree on they all agree on keeping you from having a functioning healthcare system that doesn't bankrupt you when you get sick. They all agree on not having a functioning banking system. They all agree on that's the irony of all this. They all agree on that stuff. But again, I know very quote unquote smart people in Hollywood, the people we were just talking about, the people at the top of comedy, who have no fucking idea how propagandized and controlled they are. People still walking around tweeting out, Facebooking how much better the Democratic Party is. Joe Biden was than Donald Trump. It's just a joke. They don't care that they were lied to, that they were being led by a demented guy for 4 straight days. That doesn't matter. They still talk about Donald Trump lying. Does Donald Trump lie? Yes. Why are you pretend? But they have to pretend that Donald Trump invented lying in Washington, D.C. The whole goddamn city runs on lies. They're lying from start to finish. The whole thing. You think they aren't lying? Joe Biden proved how much he lied. So it's a very frustrating time for me. And, it should be for all Americans, because there's nowhere to turn. And I don't know how they're going to keep. So they're going to keep doing this. They're going to keep pretending that Bernie Sanders and AOC are fighting for the working man. And they're going to keep pretending that Donald Trump is fighting the deep state. They're all pretend.
Yes, I agree. And, you made a good point there on both the part about AOC, like that they want, you have these ridiculous representations that make it so, you either choose to side with the party regardless of how bad they are, or, choose the other side. Either way, it's a false binary. That's what's so frustrating. But the point you're making there is that you have people that see it to a degree. But they see the Republicans, the Donald Trump, and they're lying, and that administration's manipulating. But then you're saying or tweeting about the greatness of the Democratic Party. And the problem is that it's the same thing from the right now. They're at this line where I think every problem exists on the other side of the paradigm, and they will not allow themselves to see it in themselves. And I actually think that's a dwindling number. I think that is getting less and less people are falling into that. And it's because it's just that obvious today, but it is still working with some. And I think that's what I'm worried about, going back to the Washington, D.C. point, and just technocracy in general, the Palantir surveillance of this country, the Israeli infiltration, the globalism, as you rightly pointed out, that this is this is like a desperate rush to get to this point because they're losing control, whatever that they is, the power structure that's currently here.
That's correct. And Hillary Clinton said, if we can't, I forget, I'm going to butcher the quote, but she said, if we lose our power to censor, then we're going to lose the whole game. And so, yeah, if they lose the power of the narrative, which they've been able to handle, right? That's why the consolidation of the media in 1996 with the Telecommunications Act, which was ushered in from Bill Clinton, consolidated the power so that's why they're able to pull off something like COVID, because they controlled the narrative. There wasn't a major news outlet that wasn't completely bought and paid for by Big Pharma to give a counter narrative and give it legitimacy. It was so all we had was Joe Rogan's platform or a smaller platform like mine, and they could easily, write articles in all the other publications to slander and smear us and discredit us. And so there wasn't a legitimate news outlet left because they're all owned by the same 6 companies. Right now, it's maybe even 5.
That's not.
They keep consolidating. Exactly what Marc said. Capitalism eats itself. Look what's happening with CBS and Paramount, which is owned. They own CBS. They own Paramount. They own Comedy Central and MTV and they own all these things. And now even a bigger company, Skynet or whatever it's called, is coming to buy them, and with an even richer guy, Larry Ellison. And so we have even less choice. So it's like George Carlin says, you get 40 different kinds of cereal. You only get 2 health insurance companies. Right. You only get 3 so that's you only have a couple of media companies, and they all work for the same people. It's somebody should do a documentary on how often Rachel Maddow and Sean Hannity agree on things.
That's a good point. Well, that's exactly what you were saying a second ago, is that when it really matters, they seem to all be on the same page. And so let's talk about, to kind of wrap the last 15 minutes, about Epstein and where this is, how everything we've kind of discussed today. I think that topic, and really, I truly, tell me what you think, I think it's more about the Israel overlap to it that has caused this to be what it is, but has fractured what's going on right now. And so I'll just start by pointing this out, that Trump again today, as Glenn Greenwald's pointing out, came out again and said, and called I have the clip if you want to see it, but called it a hoax. You want to see it? Okay, let's watch it.
Sure.
The driving force behind Operation.
That's not the one. Hold on. I think it was, shoot, maybe I don't have it. Well, here, I'll set you up to talk about it, and then I'll grab it while we're looking at this. So the point was a hoax, and also that the secondary release of more information is just a Democrat lie. Like, how do you even try to pull things like that off when they're the ones telling us that more releases are going to come out? So give me your thoughts on that, and I'll grab that clip and we can play it.
So Trump again calls her Epstein file. Here it is.
Calls the files a hoax in general, and basically says that even the idea that more information is going to come out from their administration is just simply like a Democrat lie. And it just continues every day to day, insulting his own base, calling them weaklings for caring about something that he made sure, or I should be more clear, his administration, he did play a part in it, but Cash and Bongino and everybody pushing the idea that this was going to be, would bring down the deep state. The Democrats would be exposed. Okay, I got it. Let's watch it. There we go.
Vance hosting a gathering this evening to talk about how to respond to the Epstein situation?
Is he working on what?
Is he hosting some kind of gathering of top advisors this evening to talk about how to respond to the Epstein situation?
I don't know. I could ask you that question. I don't know of it, but I think here's the man right here.
I saw it reported today, and it's completely fake news. We're not meeting to talk about the Epstein situation, and I think the reporter who reported it needs to get better sources.
Look, the whole thing is a hoax. It's put out by the Democrats because we've had the most successful 6 months in the history of our country. And that's just a way of trying to divert attention to something that's total bullshit. Okay?
Gus.
Yeah, please.
A new Gallup poll said.
I don't think that conveys the kind of certainty he wants it to when you cuss in the Oval Office or wherever they are. So what do you think about that?
Yeah. Again, it's another betrayal of MAGA. I mean, he's so they all look like fools and chumps and controlled opposition. And, JD Vance himself tweeted was I played it on, showed it on my show. His tweet about the, let's see the Epstein files. So they were all J.D. Vance, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino saying, don't let this story go. Don't do that. And then as soon as he gets into a position of power, he starts lying at the top of his lungs. Oh, I saw the video. It's clear. And it's like, really? Because the video we saw was the opposite of clear. Mm. In fact, it was doctored in several different ways. And you guys are lying. Yep. And so it's not good for the Trump administration. The longer they try to, what he's trying to do is bully you into not asking questions. The same thing that the Democrats did during COVID. Mm-hmm. How dare you're an idiot if you talk about ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine. You're an idiot if you question masks or lockdown. You're an idiot if you don't take everything Dr. Fauci says, even though he contradicts himself constantly. You're an idiot. You're a racist if you think the equivalent of him using the word bullshit there is the equivalent of Democrats calling you a racist for questioning where the COVID virus came from. It didn't work for the Democrats. It's not going to work for Trump. In fact, it's going to be worse for Trump, I think, because the whole brand is built on questioning authority. That's the whole thing. And of course, now they're the authority, and they're shaming you for questioning them. It's kind of ironic, and it's bad that from people from Candace Owens to Tucker. When you've lost Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, which Trump has in a lot of ways, in a lot of different things. Now, if the election was tomorrow, would they all tell you to vote for Trump? Probably.
I agree.
But they're very vocal. Because of the alternative. That's why. Right. And that's exactly what the establishment wants. They don't want you to have something you can vote for. They only want you to have something you can vote against.
That's well said. That's exactly the way to frame that. It's they get you so worked up against hating the other. And by the way, that's the same that's going on with the genocide carrying out in the world. Which is their narrative is failing around that, but clearly trying to convince people that they're just evil monster. I literally saw Megyn Kelly, not to lurch into this, but on Piers Morgan make the argument. At this level, it's insane to me that. They're showing the pictures of starving children, and she goes, well, I don't take them at face value because Palestinians would rather watch their children starve than help people or they work with Israelis, something insane like that, and it's just that kind of thing shows you the kind of propaganda we're dealing with. But, that what we were saying before is, the overlap to it is very interesting because it seems as if, rightly so, in my opinion, and we already discussed the point is we're talking about Zionist infiltration of governments and all sorts of things, that the focus for the current, like the MAGA movement, or just conservatives, Republicans, is that Israel has influenced at the very least what Trump is doing. And that's it. The overlap to Epstein is why that's not coming out. It's weird right now. They take a recess and Congress goes to Israel. So it's very strange. So, do you think that's what's driving this? And what do you think that will mean if this just doesn't stop? Will they revolt on him? What do you think?
Well, I don't know. They're not going to have a chance to vote for Donald Trump again. Mm-hmm. But, J.D. Vance would be the heir apparent. And
I mean, more so now, though, like in the next 6 months, a year, they
are. I see a lot. Like I said, Candace Owens is going both barrels. Tucker Carlson is openly mocking their position on Epstein. Tucker Carlson gave a speech at that Turning Points thing where he said, they say the economy's doing great. I say the economy's doing horrible because the metrics he uses to judge if the economy's doing well is if his kids with full-time jobs, can they afford a house? And they can't. And he said that. So I don't care what GDP is. I know that my kids who are working full-time can't afford a house. And that's a failing economy. So, it's from everything from that to and again, Joe Rogan's turned on him over immigration. He's like, this isn't what we voted for. No, we didn't want him to go after these people. We wanted him to go after the drug cartel and the criminals. And he's going after students, and he's going after, guys hanging out at the Home Depot. So looking for work. So it's fallen apart faster than I could have imagined it would fall apart. Yeah. And I think that the core of it is that turned into the woke right. So no matter what anybody tells you, the woke right are the people who want to censor you and accuse you of hate crimes for your hate speech. That's the woke right, and that all revolves around Israel. And so that's not America first, that's Israel first. And to the point where, I don't know if you saw just the other day, the Trump administration wanted to predicate disaster relief from FEMA, $2 billion on if your state is sufficiently loyal to Israel, and if it's not, you don't get your disaster relief. That they had to walk it back, but they only walked it back rhetorically, because they still have the language in the policy that says that if you are being discriminatory against anyone, you're not going to get our federal funds. And all they have to do is say you're being discriminatory towards Jews. Right. And by that, they really mean Zionists and Israel. They don't mean Jews. They mean Zionists and Israel. So that's again, the two people who like to conflate Judaism with Zionism are anti-Semites and Zionists. That's the irony.
Yeah, that's a good way to put that. So much contradiction everywhere you look at all this. But see, that's what happens when you're lying about everything. I've said that so many times over the years as a U.S. government point, but same thing here. If you're lying about everything, at some point, you're going to have to contradict a previous lie to sell somebody on something new. I mean, it should continue. And that's what they keep doing. But right there, the narrative is just one big ball of lies. And it just day to day just keeps looking worse. Your tweet here just saying America first winning about them saying that. I don't know if you saw this, though. This is what I was covering this just the other day. And so it started where they had this posted, right? And your good point, by the way, it's specifically Israeli companies, as opposed to something about, we're talking about an Israeli state, and, that's the conflation there with something about, whether it's Jews or whether it's about racism, because that's where Jews live. It's a weird way to frame that. That's why I think it got a lot of attention. You're telling us we can't boycott a foreign country, right? Now, then they removed it, as you pointed out. That went away. But what I found was weird is that night, they actually added it back.
Oh, no kidding.
And then the next day, deleted the entire page. I mean, it's just, they're drowning in all this. And it just seems so desperate what they're doing, but I think it's a good point to understand that they are very clearly trying to cultivate the way we see these things and trying to manipulate us. But when they get seen, clearly they're in a vulnerable point to where they pull back and they run. I just think it's very interesting how obvious all this is. But
I agree. It's very obvious. It's, again, if they didn't have such weak adversaries, they would be done for. But they do have, Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, and Kamala Harris is looking like she's probably going to run for president again.
You think?
Gavin Newsom. Well, she's not running for governor, and if she's not going to run for governor, the only reason, because she was out here going around to the fire burned out neighborhoods and stuff. Kamala Harris was, and I'm like, oh, she's going to run for governor, because I guess Newsom can't, but now it looks like she's not going to run for governor, so maybe she's going to run for president. But anyway, again, the only thing keeping right now the Republican Party together is the fact that their adversaries are so horrible and obviously corrupted, because they're obviously corrupted. I mean, $1 trillion defense budget, all that noise about Doge, and none of that money gets cut. None of it gets cut. They just fold it into the State Department. They put it into the Pentagon budget, and they explode the Pentagon budget, and they explode the deficit. And so all this talk about Doge was that we got to tighten our belts. We got to get rid of this wasteful spending so we can balance the budget, because this is unsustainable. $37 trillion in debt. And they just do the exact opposite. And, people see that, and people see it because guys like Elon Musk made a big deal out of it. I was really happy that Elon Musk was making as much noise and ruckus about the big, beautiful bill as he did, because it woke a lot of people up. And so good for that. So again, they were just blessed with horrible enemies, but that's because there's people who control Donald Trump. There's people who control the Democrats, people who control the Republicans, and people who control Donald Trump. It's obvious that Israel, Mossad, and Netanyahu controls Donald Trump. Those aren't his ideas. And so, and even bigger control him. So, my whole I've been trying to get people away from the two-party duopoly since they screwed over Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders went along with it. And that's when I knew, oh, there's no, because Bernie Sanders had so much power, he could have demanded anything he wanted from the Democratic Party, and he would have gotten it. And he, you know what he demanded? Absolutely nothing. He didn't demand anything. He didn't demand corporate money out of the primary process. He didn't demand to get rid of super delegates. He didn't demand, he could have did that easily. He didn't do anything. He didn't demand a vote on Medicare for all. He didn't nothing. He demanded absolutely nothing. And so that's was like, oh, so he's not here to actually make change. Bernie Sanders is here to pretend to make change and to let you know this is as far left as you can go in the Democratic Party. And if you go any farther left than Bernie or AOC, you're crazy. You're a crazy far leftist. If you actually want to be a leftist, then you're crazy because you're not allowed to do that. And, you know, it's just funny that Bernie Sanders is now in AOC, you know, that when Joe Biden had more billionaires supporting Biden and Kamala than even Trump did. Think about that. And now they're on a tour to end the oligarchy. Well, where were you for those 4 years? Oh, you didn't want to end the oligarchy then, but now you do. No, you're just, this is just another way to sheep herd people back into the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And get ready for the, you know, and I have a little bit of a less positive view about Elon Musk, but, you know, let's get ready for the America Party and the AI technocracy party. And to your point, get ready for Kamala to run and then have either him or maybe even JD Vance with the next party. And they're lesser of evils and the whole thing starts all over again.
It's all lesser of evils voting.
Yeah.
And people I know smart people in Hollywood who defend it to the death. You can't tell me that the Democrats aren't a little better. That people say that. That they say it, then they believe it, or they convince themselves that that's true.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, I think
they call people like me an accelerist, you know, and it's just like, no, I'm just done with it.
Yeah.
And
or apologists.
The faster people wake up to the fact that you're being duped by this two-party system,
Yep.
the better. Nothing will change until people lose hope in the fucking government.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Here. I've been saying that for the longest time. And specifically, like you're saying about the two-party illusion, that is like the crux of this issue. Not the only problem, but very clearly the biggest in keeping us trapped in there. Thanks for being here today, Jimmy. Anything else you want to leave us with? Upcoming shows, things you want to shout out before we leave today?
Yeah, I'll be in Manhattan coming up next weekend at the Village Underground. Then I'll be in Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver, and Rutherford, New Jersey. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. I'll see you there.
Outstanding. All right, brother. Well, it's good talking to you again. I'll see
Great
you next
to talk
time.
to you. Thank you, brother. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.